So you want to learn a language. Almost 2 years ago, I was in your exact position. So in this video, I want to give you all the things that I would have liked to know when I first started. And at the end of this video, I'm going to give you the 3 traits that I think best predict who will be successful at language learning. So the first thing that I would have liked to know when I started is that language learning is very, very slow. It takes a long time. And it's not something you can just speed through because of your intelligence. This is something I really like about language learning because, in my opinion, it makes it very accessible. You know, anybody can learn a language. It doesn't require you to be a genius to do it. Some things in life are actually harder, like they require more creativity and more, maybe more memory, maybe more processing power in your brain. But language learning, in my opinion, is one of these things where you just get out what you put in, which is great because it's true that you can't always be the smartest person in the room, but you can always be the hardest working. And if you're willing to put in the time, language learning is a really great hobby. Another thing that I would like to have known is that language learning isn't easy, but it's not hard in the way that you might think it's hard. I think people coming from other disciplines might get the idea that language learning is hard because you have to do a lot of memorization or you have to be really good at grammar or something. The difficulty of language learning instead comes from how long it takes. It's just a long, long, long road. Basically, language learning isn't hard like a sprint is hard. When you sprint, you have to put in all your energy. You have to, really force yourself and push yourself. And it's a momentary burst of force and willpower. But language learning isn't like that. It's more like an ultra marathon, where it's more like walking an ultra marathon. The difficulty isn't, I have to exert myself a ton. It's more of, I have to just keep going and going and going. It takes a long time to unconsciously understand and produce a language. That's because language learning is a very different creature than other subjects we learn in school. If I asked you what 2 plus 2 is, you would easily say, it's 4, right? Hopefully. Maybe I got that wrong on camera. But if I asked you, what's 286 plus 387, you couldn't tell me right off the bat. What you would need is some paper and some pencils, maybe just one pencil. You just need something to write down or to do the math out on. It doesn't mean you don't know how to do math. It just means you don't have all of the summations of all integers memorized, which is normal. In language learning, you kind of do need all those things memorized. Which is why, and that's impossible for the brain, to memorize things consciously like that. So instead, your brain uses a different system entirely. Because when you listen to someone speak the language, or you produce the language yourself, you don't have time to do these calculations in your head. You don't have time to say, okay, this vocab word, this grammar rule, I hear this sentence structure, this thing, I'm gonna translate it into English, and now I'm gonna, your brain doesn't have the processing power to do that. So when there's a big complex system, like a language, our brains don't need to consciously memorize to be able to produce it and understand it. And the proof of this is the fact that you can understand me right now and you're not translating in your head. You're not really thinking super hard about what I'm saying. And that's because your brain has recognized patterns of English by taking in tons and tons of input throughout your entire life. And that system is the system we access when we learn a foreign language. Some people might have the idea that I just have, because I speak Spanish fluently, I just have this big list of grammar, vocab, all these rules in my head, and every time I speak it, I'm just accessing those rules. But that's not how it feels at all. It feels like it's speaking and understanding my native language, except through, maybe there's like a towel over it. People say like kissing someone through a towel. Huh? I would say that's kind of a similar feeling as you get better and better at a language. It's like there's something, it's a little fuzzy, but it's basically the same system. The name of the language learning method I'm talking about is called comprehensible input. The idea that your brain unconsciously acquires language as you actively listen to content in another language that you understand. We're not talking about listening to a Chinese movie when you haven't even learned a word of Chinese, because you don't understand that. We're talking about taking in information in the form of input from a different language where you can actually understand to a high degree what the person is communicating. That means in the beginning, when you don't know much of your language, watching things that maybe babies would watch, like lots of pictures, lots of visual aid. That's what comprehensible input is. And that's how I became fluent in Spanish. I mean, I'm not telling you things that I didn't do myself, because I want to get to the next thing I want to talk about, which is how long it takes, right? Because I said it'll take a long, long, long time. But most people who want to learn a language, they want to learn it now. They don't want to learn it in 6 months. The reason I learned a language is because my girlfriend didn't speak English well. So, you know, I took it upon myself to learn Spanish. And I didn't want to be fluent in 6 months. I wanted to be fluent in 1 day, which is impossible. But let's get into like how long it takes. So I'm gonna give you my perspective, how long it took me, and I'm gonna give you some general information about how long it takes to learn languages. It's not helpful to talk about learning languages in terms of days, weeks, or months, or years, because the way I look at it, it's all about how much input you consumed. So I don't say I consumed a day or a year of input or a week of input. I say I consumed input in hours. So when someone says like, how good is your Spanish, and they're aware of comprehensible input, I say, well, I've consumed over 800 hours of comprehensible input. So it's much easier to talk about hours because I actually have tracked my hours. If I said a year, you don't know how much time a day I actually spent consuming content. So again, talking in hours just makes more sense. So I learned Spanish, and Dreaming Spanish has their guidelines about how long it takes to be able to understand native speakers speaking to you normally. And they put that at around 600 hours. And it's important to note that English to Spanish is probably one of the easiest languages a native English speaker can learn. So obviously, if you're doing Chinese or Japanese, it'll take longer. But basically 600 hours for English to a Romance language. Also, we have the FSI rating system, which is like a government rating system. If the government is training you to learn a foreign language to go to a different country, they have specific amounts of hours that you'll be ready to actually, you know, speak and use the language fluently in. And they actually come out right around the same as Dreaming Spanish at 600 to 750 classroom hours. So they're using classroom hours, not comprehensible input hours. But it's interesting that they still come out to the same general area, 600 to 750. If we imagine that 150 classroom hours were kind of wasted just doing grammar and doing things that really weren't helping you comprehend the language more and more, then it would make sense that 750 applies to the classroom, whereas 600 is the actual, you know, raw amount of hours. For me, I'd say I was very, very, very comfortable in Spanish at around 700 hours. But I would have told you I speak Spanish much earlier, at around the 300 mark, which is where Dreaming Spanish will tell you that's when you can understand a native speaker speaking to you patiently. And that's a good summation for me as well. So I think you'll really enjoy your results at 300. You'll be very comfortable around 600 to 700. 150 is where I think it stops being so brutal, you know? Or maybe even a little bit less than that, 100 hours is where it stops being so brutal. Because I think in the beginning, as you can imagine, having to sit through people talk to you in a foreign language like a child gets a little bit old. But staying on that topic for a second, the question of, you know, the beginning, what do you do? I think in the beginning you're gonna have a lot of temptation to not use the input method because it's pretty uncomfortable and you really wanna be more familiar with the language. You don't just wanna be able to say, oh, I understand the main point, so therefore I'm picking up the language. Your brain is more comfortable saying, I want to know every word, every sentence. And I think people who are, you know, were good at school, who had good grades, very organized people, note takers, really fall into this trap because they're just not comfortable dealing with the uncertainty. I was not comfortable either. Also, I didn't find the comprehensible input method until a bit later into my studying, into my Spanish learning process. In comprehensible input, there's a bit of infighting because you need 80% comprehension for the thing you're watching to count as comprehensible input. But it's pretty hard to get 80% comprehension, especially depending on which language you're acquiring. So the question becomes, can I cheat a little bit in the beginning? Can I do some flashcards? Can I learn some grammar? Can I use subtitles? Things of that nature. Now, for me, I did all of those things. Every single one of those things I did. This is what I would call the problem of knocking down the first domino. Because you need to get that 80% comprehension to do comprehensible input, and it's really a struggle to get there. In my opinion, it doesn't really matter in the long run. That's my full opinion. I think that I eventually learned Spanish. And is it true that possibly I could have built a better intuitive base for the language in the beginning, and that would have made me stronger at this point? That's very possible. So I think it might be a short-term versus long-term trade-off. On one hand, if you go slow and you just do comprehensible input, I think that makes sense that you have a stronger intuitive base of the language. On the other hand, if you hack your way past the absolute beginner stages, you'll definitely be able to, you know, comprehend more of the more interesting content faster. So it's a trade-off. I personally think, again, it does not matter in the long run. It's a question of how do you want to knock over the first domino? Because whatever path you take, it's gonna be almost a drop in the bucket to your entire language learning journey. If we call absolute beginner to beginner 50 hours, which is what Dreaming Spanish says, and I agree with, then it's when you learn a lot of common words and you get familiar with the language. If we call that 50 hours, and we say fluency or comfort in the language comes at around 600 to 700 hours, that's really nothing in the grand scheme of things. You have a long time. So over time, no matter what you do, you'll just be doing. There's a bird singing over there. Everybody I talk to who learns a language says the same thing in the end. After a certain point, it's just all input, right? So in the beginning, you might cheat. You might use some flashcards, some grammar, some this, some that. But as you go through, as you get further and further into the language, it's just more input. So all roads lead to input, basically. At the beginning of the video, I said I go over the 3 traits that I think most predict success in language learners. So I'm gonna do that now. The first one is confidence. If you don't believe you can do this, then you can't. And if you do believe you can do this, you can. Because the people who don't think they can do it don't put in the amount of time required to actually do it. So they get stuck in this, almost mental prison. They might have this mental block that says, everybody who's learned a language is just so much smarter than me, and I'm just not smart enough, so therefore I can't do it. But you're not special, If it worked for everybody else in the world, it'll work for you. There's nothing special about you. There's nothing special about any of us. We all learn language the same way. It's something I believe, and you can do it. The second is discipline. I meet a lot of people who, for a day they're excited, the excitement dissipates, and you never hear about it again from them. That's someone who I wouldn't predict would succeed at language learning. The person who succeeds at language learning is disciplined, and when they say they're gonna do something, they do it. If you, every day in the morning, have to get up and say, oh, I hate this, I have to do language learning, it's not going to work. If you can't will yourself into learning a language, it takes too much time. You need to have discipline. You need to work it into your routine somehow. You need to find a way that it works for you. If someone told me, oh yeah, I'm learning Spanish, I'm toughing it out, in the beginning I understand you're toughing it out. But if someone said they're toughing it out and they kept saying they're toughing it out, I would eventually think to myself, this person seems to be using too much willpower and not enough discipline. So someone who's disciplined, someone who makes their bed every day, someone who has good routines, to me, has a much better chance of succeeding in language learning. And the final thing that I think predicts success is, do you have a goal? Do you have something you're doing this for? Do you have something durable that you can wake up every day and say, I want to learn this because of this? If you have a reason like that, you have a way better chance of learning a language. That's why people who do it for their romantic partners tend to be a lot better at language learning. And if you talk to a lot of people who have actually successfully done it, it's for that reason. You can have any reason you want. Travel, anything. I mean, I'm not saying you need a specific reason. I'm saying it has to be a durable reason that you actually wake up every day thinking, oh, I still want this. If it's a reason that some days you're like, oh, I don't know if I want that anymore, then I think that's an issue. And in my opinion, this is the most important of the 3. I think if you treat it like a hobby, I'm not sure you'll be able to do it. If you treat it like any normal hobby, because it just takes so long. If you've made it to the end of the video and you've decided you're gonna do comprehensible input, or you're already doing comprehensible input, I think it's really important that you get your progress externally validated. Comprehensible input is not like traditional language learning, and it's pretty unstructured. And if you don't see your comprehension and your hours going up every day, that's not gonna help you stay motivated. So for that reason, I made an app called Lengualytics where you can track your hours and you can see your comprehension and other statistics grow as you learn Spanish, French, German, or whatever language you're learning. All of that content that people are tracking gets stored on the platform, so we have a big pool of resources if you're trying to find comprehensible input content in your language. We have tons of languages, so we probably have yours. You can find the link in the description, probably in the comments. You can just type in Lengualytics in your search engine if you know how to spell it, which you might not because it's not a real word. Y al final de los videos que hago, usualmente yo hablo un poco en español para mostrarles que sí, yo hablo el idioma que dije que yo hablo. Así que esto es mi español. Gracias por verme.